Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about a very significant event, which is Saturn ingressing into Aries. So if you watch my 2025 horoscopes, you know that I mentioned that Saturn in Aries was a little bit dicey for me personally. And again, a lot of astrologers have their opinions on big planets like Saturn and what they really mean going into very significant signs like Aries. And I say Aries is significant because it's the leader and instigator of the zodiac. So it's always going to be, for me, a little bit under the microscope because it is a little bit of a tense sign. One of my favorite signs outside of my own is the Sagittarius. I said before, I love Aries. I really think they're a fascinating sign. They're very complex and multifaceted. But something like Saturn, a planet that is very, I would say it's very old worldy, it likes to stay where it likes to stay, with Aries, which is more fast forward and moving and probably likes to do things a bit differently. These two don't go together too well. I always say that Saturn is the big daddy. It's like, the old kind of god, and Aries is a bit James Dean, trigger happy, rebel without a cause, going to do what I want kind of thing, a bit Billy Idol. So these two together, it's like Saturn's looking at Aries and saying, hey kid, you're kind of annoying me and you need to stop writing all over the walls. And Aries is like, no, I'm going to do whatever I want. So Saturn is a very hard place in Aries. It doesn't necessarily like to be there. So in my 2025 horoscopes, I did say, I find this to be a bit of a tense transit. And specifically, I find it to be more tense because it's going to be meeting up with Neptune in Aries. So Saturn and Neptune both in Aries. I don't think this is the worst thing in the world. I don't think we should be scared or worried. However, I do think looking at the political situation of the world right now, it does kind of worry me a little bit. Neptune is larger than life. It is the spread of something. Neptune is our collective consciousness. It's our dreams, our fantasy, and our illusion. When you put that together with something like Saturn in Aries, which again doesn't really do well, it's really like the spread of a lot of tension. To me, it's like a pissing contest between world leaders where you're like, oh, okay, I think there's some tension here. Almost like, I'm trying to get one up on you just because I said so. So that energy there is a little bit tense for me. However, I will go into detail about what this means for, political and world events, how it means for us as your rising sign. But I just want to give you a bit of context about how I personally feel about Saturn in Aries. I also think it's important to mention that, when the pandemic, I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, because every time someone says something like, oh, you can't say it. Well, when that big world event happened, in January 2020, and then everything sort of got locked down March 2020, we had a really big event with Saturn and Pluto. And whenever you have Saturn and Pluto in conjunction or something where they're opposing each other, it's like, oh my God, there's always something very important going on. And that was really giving us a test of, hey, we're going to be locked down. We're going to have those boundaries. We're going to have that constriction, and that can be very difficult. So I just always kind of think back to that moment of the kind of harsh lessons that Saturn can sometimes bring us as well. So Saturn will be going into Aries May the 24th, 2025. I'll put all the dates on the screen as well so you have this. But it's kind of like a striptease. It won't be there like the whole time, like it's going to go in and out. So it will be there until September the 2nd, 2025, and then it will go into Pisces, will retrograde into Pisces. And if you're a Saturn in Pisces kid like me, then you kind of don't get a reprieve, but we've really learned so many lessons that it doesn't really matter too much. We're kind of like, yeah, you can't really hurt me anymore. So if you have a Saturn in Aries in your natal chart, you will be having your Saturn return. So again, this is a striptease, so it's not going to be like, oh, we're full speed into it, okay? It will go back into Pisces September, and then it will return into Aries February the 15th, 2026, where it will remain until April 14th, 2028. And that's when you really get that long stretch of permanent kind of Saturn return energy. The lessons really start to come flowing in there. So those are the dates that Saturn will be in Aries. If you are having your Saturn return, do not worry too much, okay? So a Saturn return is, you may know a little bit about this, you may not, but it's really just about intense kind of personal growth and self-discovery. It's around ages 27 to 30, so around the time that you start to get very serious about long-term planning for your life, getting stable jobs, maybe thinking about marriage and children and all those things that society tells us we should think about. I'm like 29 and I'm like, the only thing I got that was like a stable job, like nothing else, right? But I went through some intense transformation with my mental health and definitely my spirituality, and I had a Saturn in Pisces, so I certainly went through that element of the boundaries of my delusions and my illusions and whatnot. So a Saturn return will give you very important life events, especially around commitments. It will also sometimes break those down as well. So you could have engagements and marriage, maybe even divorce and breakups, getting a very stable job, losing a stable job, moving house, doing things that really impact your personal growth. And that's not necessarily something to be afraid of. I think that's something we have to go through. But I think it can be okay, what more do you want to give me? Because Saturn does give you some harsh lessons, but it's always normally for the best. I always see Saturn as, and I say because I'm Saturn ruled as a Capricorn rising, like I have a lot of Jupiter in my, I'm kind of like saying I'm both Jupiter and Saturn ruled. It's kind of like, I got a bit of both, but technically I'm Saturn ruled. And I think that Saturn is a bit like, when you don't want to give your dog something because you know it will probably kill them. You're like, hey, I really don't want to give you this massive brownie because it's really not good for you. And the dog's like, I hate you. And you're like, I know, but you can't have it. That's kind of what Saturn does. It either gives you a lesson or withholds something that you want for the best. And you can't really see it in the moment. You're like, damn, when did I sign up to be on the battlefield here? I don't want to be one of God's strongest soldiers. But Saturn kind of does that for you. So some people will get away with having a very nice Saturn return depending on what's going on in their chart. Some people are more highly favored and highly blessed. Others have a bit more of a, wow, I'm getting hit like crazy right now. And it kind of just depends what kind of person you are. I think my Saturn return was like, okay. I don't think it was really scary. I don't think anything majorly bad happened. I definitely had a lot of interesting kind of changes in my life. But really Saturn in Aries, the one good thing about it is that in Aries, it really gives us that independent leadership. And we really learn to be independent. We learn to become the people that we're meant to be. And we also learn to take charge of our own lives and stop being a victim, stop letting other people tell us what to do. So in that regard, it is quite good. But also Saturn in Aries, again, it's difficult because it's like a mirror. Right? I explained this in my 2025 horoscopes. It's like a mirror that's got fog over it. And the Aries energy is going to go boom, punch, because it can't see its own reflection, right? And what's that going to do? Shatter a mirror and give you 7 years of bad luck, right? So it's like, okay. So we have to be patient. We have to cultivate patience, which is very difficult because Aries is not patient. It's fast forward, it's moving. It's like, oh, I'm going to go with that thinking. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to really try to strategically plan for long-term events for our lives when we're trying to be on the go, go, go. So we will really learn to be patient, and we may have lessons that we're like, okay, this is teaching me to really be patient and be grateful for what I have now so that when I get what I want, it can be a good thing. Although I'm a big believer that we can get what we want now. I'm very impatient. I'm a Sagittarius, right? So I'm like, I want what I want now. I don't want to have to wait. Like, I'd have to wait for life. But you do sometimes get those restrictive kind of lessons from Saturn in Aries. So that's a kind of long spiel of a rant of basically what Saturn in Aries kind of is, the Saturn return. And again, I will talk about all the rising signs at the end of this video. What I want to now move on to is when Saturn in Aries was last happening. So the most key dates and how that might affect what's going to happen for global events. The reason I mention this is because I could say Saturn in Aries gives me a world leader kind of taunting energy. We've recently seen, very, very extreme tariffs being placed on countries by, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And I'm talking as large as like 125% tariff. There is a very big energy here with Saturn in Aries where it's like, okay, I'm going to slap a massive tariff on you because I said so. And then another country's like, well, I'm going to respond like this because I said so. And it becomes a butting of heads because both parties, again, I'm talking about something very sort of hypothetical here, can't really see the real reflection because there's fog on the mirror, but both are going to punch the mirror together. All you do is get two shattered versions of this, you know, of either party. You can't see clearly. So, you know, let's talk about big superpowers like America, the United States, you know, Russia. Look at conflicts like Israel and Gaza, right? Or even escalating tensions now, India and Pakistan. So how do we look at the way that these kinds of, you know, nations are fighting with each other and taunting each other? Then we look at Neptune and Aries, which is the spread of this kind of anger, the spread of this kind of like energy being shackled. The worst thing you want to do is try to shackle a very powerful entity when Saturn is in Aries, because Saturn is the boundary, it's constriction, it's trapped, it's shackled. Aries doesn't like that. Aries is going to get the chains and say that no. So it's not going to respond, nations are not going to respond well to tariffs, even more so. They're not going to respond to threats very well. This is not a, oh, well, you know, maybe you just need to sit down outside the sun and have a banana kind of energy. It's a, oh, you want to go there. So that's why it worries me a little bit, because I do see it as we're reaching a boiling point, right? A melting point. And this is not to fearmonger. I don't want to be an astrologer that fearmongers, but you have to look at the current geopolitical climate and say, okay, there is some real shit going on here. This is actually a worry. This is a problem. So I think it would be naive to say that Saturn going into Aries is not going to change anything, right? It just will be. So again, we can choose how to react to that. You know, if it's your reality that nothing is going to happen and everything's going to be fine, that's your reality, cool. My reality is that I don't want anything bad to happen. I think everything's going to be fine, but I can't ignore the fact that I'm probably going to see more things in the news, and I'm going to be able to analyze that pattern in data, because that is what astrology is. It's not woo-woo nonsense. It's a analysis of patterns in data, looking at past historical events, looking at moments in time where we can say, okay, this might happen. This sounds really funny, and I actually told somebody, my friend in New York, about this, and he thought I was crazy, but I said I knew that the Pope was going to die. And he said, yeah, right. I'm like, no, it was so obvious the Pope was going to die. I even said to my dad, oh, I just think there's going to be something like really like a grieving moment in the world, especially like religious, in the news. And I didn't say exactly the Pope. But then the next day the Pope died, and I was like, I kind of said, I just had a feeling some very important figure, especially religious, was going to. Yeah. So sometimes you just have a feeling intuitively, because I am an intuitive as well, but also you're like, I just kind of analyzed the patterns of data. I looked at a lot of this fixed line energy that I just thought looked a bit dicey, and then I kind of came to that conclusion. So I think that's what these kind of big transits are. Anyway, let me stop waffling on and talk about some of the past historical events for Saturn in Aries. So April the 25th, 1937 to March the 20th, 1940. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory what was happening at that time. World War II. I don't really need to talk about too much, you know, there's probably different events, but I think that was the biggie. I think that was what most people were concentrating on, was the fact that they were trying to survive during World War II, which was, you know, a horrific time in our history. I'm hoping that you are educated enough to know what happened during that time, but that was really difficult. And, you know, I don't want to talk too much about, independent political figures, but I find it fascinating that Hitler was an Aries. Hitler was actually born on April the 20th, which is my dad's birthday, is an Aries. Interesting. But yeah, he was an Aries, and he was known for being incredibly aggressive. That's a stereotype of Aries. I think Aries are actually very vulnerable and sometimes very insecure, but I just thought it was interesting to point that out. So World War II happened during that time. Saturn was in Aries, you know, obviously territories that were being taken by force. They didn't want to be. They had constrictions and boundaries. And then also pointing to very difficult times where people were having to prove themselves. They felt trapped, you know. Again, it's very self-explanatory that Saturn in Aries was very notable during this time. The next instance is also very important for political upheaval, was March the 3rd, 1967 to April 29th, 1969. This was really important because it's a very significant period of upheaval for politics, and I want to talk about some of the reflections to present day. So some of the key events, especially 1967, was the Arab-Israeli War. So this was called the 6-Day war that happened between June the 5th to June the 10th, which it basically, again, I'm not a historian, so please do check me in the comments if I'm not saying everything correctly. I didn't really study a lot of these events, but I'm just saying that obviously there's some shades to what's happening now. So during that Six-Day War, Israel defeated Egypt, Jordan and Syria, and they gained control of the Sinai Peninsula. So that was like the West Bank, West Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Again, there's probably some more kind of detail to this, but I think that's quite interesting when we look at the current political situation with Gaza and Israel. Okay, Israel, a Jewish state, and Gaza, a Muslim state in Palestine. So it's very interesting because, you know, actually where I work, which I won't say where I work, but where I work, there was a protest yesterday about Palestine and how they wanted to free Palestine. And it made me think, I actually hadn't heard about protests and much news around me. Not saying it's not happening in the world, because it is, but around me personally, I hadn't noticed. And I said to a work colleague, I said, oh, it's interesting, they're kind of ramping up the protests again. And I think you're going to see more kind of news about that, and people saying, okay, there is still this genocide going on. There's still this kind of, you know, this political instability happening. They also had some riots as well, and you know, I would say riots are probably going to happen because Pluto's in Aquarius, so that is going to happen. You'll see people being exposed and whatnot. We had something called the Long Hot Summer, so that was a series of race riots that erupted in different US cities, around 159 cities, and that included very prominent cities like Detroit and Newark, and that was actually following the Detroit riots. So we had a lot of riots about, you know, race, and also during that period as well, religion too. You also had interesting ones as well, which I wouldn't say they were like violent, but you had like the counterculture movement of, you know, the 60s, the Summer of Love. I know a lot about the counterculture movement because I actually worked with a guy called Peter Whitehead who did documentaries for the Beatles. And so he told me all about the counterculture movement, and it was really interesting. So, you know, that became a symbol of, you know, a bit of resistance, again, trying to go against the shackles of what society was trying to put onto people. You also had the escalation of the Vietnam War. And obviously, again, I'm hoping that people know a lot about the Vietnam War to know that, again, that's a bit self-explanatory about what happened there as well. You also had the Second Korean War as well. We had these military clashes as well between North and South Korea. And, you know, I think there's some tense politics with North Korea right now, and probably has been for a while, but there's always stuff coming out about them testing nuclear bombs, and we're just like, oh God, why can we not just not do this, right? So that's another shade of that as well. Other notable events as well, you had things like Ronald Reagan, who was sworn as the governor of California. I know so much about Ronald Reagan because as part of my PhD, he actually was a big proponent of deregulation in the US for film studios. And he was obviously a prominent Republican president as well. So those kind of things happened. So at those events, what was the most important kind of like theme? It was war, right? Aries is known for being the warrior. It's about war. It was an escalation of war, an escalation of conflict as well. And these were all between, I would say, very close states. So it wasn't like, oh, America against Finland, where they're like not really in proximity to each other. It was proximity, Ukraine and Russia, Pakistan and India, Israel and Palestine, right? So these are all like close proximity kind of wars as well. 1968, you had the civil rights movement, and particularly you had the assassination of Martin Luther King and RFK. Those sparked really big nationwide protests. And the thing about them is they weren't war, but they were almost a symbol of war, right? Because you had an assassination of an incredibly iconic figure like Martin Luther King Jr., who, you know, really inspired a lot of people. And then you had the assassination of RFK, who was a president. So it's like, okay, you know, we've also seen, you know, last year we had 2 assassination, maybe even 3 if it wasn't even documented in the news, assassination attempts of Donald Trump, our current president. So I don't know if that's going to happen again, but I certainly think people are not happy with his presidency right now, and there probably could be more assassination attempts with that kind of thing. It's also very insular kind of like violence as well. It's not just like, oh, a war that everybody gets involved in. It's an assassination, you know, a sniper bullet, something that's very sort of like strategic. So Saturn, that likes to plan, it likes to be sort of strategic. Some of those kind of elements make sense as well. You know, again, you had public opinion about the Vietnam War as well, and that continued. You also had political kind of tension as well, with like President Lyndon B. Johnson said he was not going to seek re-election, and he kind of cited that as a growing opposition to war, did not want war, and his own sort of political standing. Again, I don't know too much about this, so please check me in the comments if I'm wrong. I apologize. I am not a historian. You know, my history knowledge goes to like film studios and you know, antitrust law and things like that. So I don't know too much about that, but that did happen during 1968. In 1969, the Vietnam War continued, and we also had, you know, a lot of people marching in Washington, around 500,000 people marching in Washington, protesting against that, saying we don't want war, we need to put a cap on this straight away. We had very notable things like the Stonewall riots in New York City, where there was, you know, a lot of rioting and energy for the LGBTQ plus movement, which really actually gave a lot of people today their rights and their, you know, their confidence to speak up for their sexuality and their lifestyle. So that was also very notable. Had things like Woodstock and the space race and things like that, but they're less associated with war and like a little bit more sort of about a liberation, shall we say. And also one thing that I do want to note, because it became very important for the news cycle and politics, is that Gaddafi came to power in Libya during this time, and that became really notable for Middle Eastern politics as well. You know, during the time of 1967 to 1969, you had other things as well. You had the murder of the Manson family. You also had, which I think is interesting with Aries as well, you had like the proliferation of very strong class A drugs. Well, I think they're class A drugs, like heroin and cocaine. And Aries is actually, it's known for being a little bit sort of like, I wouldn't say it's a drug kind of sign, but it's very sort of like when Aries is in very prominent signs like Uranus in Aries or something like that, normally you get things like the proliferation of drugs, of you know, adult entertainment sites, things like that, where it's like a little bit more sort of like, again, rebel without a cause energy, and I think that definitely was notable as well. So the next dates that Saturn was in Aries was April the 7th, 1996 to February the 28th, 1999. So I say that these years were a little bit less tense than the previous periods that I mentioned, but there was still extreme violence, like the Columbine High School Massacre in 1999, the Nepalese Civil War that started in 1996, and you also had an impeachment of Bill Clinton as well, and a lot of kind of political sort of like drama around that. So there was definitely some notable things in politics as well. And I would say that during this time also had a little bit of interest in the rise of the internet and what that was going to mean for everybody, concerns about computer systems and how that was really going to affect us as humans as well. So it was a little bit less sort of like tense when it comes to major things happening, although I would say Nepalese Civil War was a big thing. And I also think, you know, the High School Massacre as well was, you know, very notable. So I'm not going to, you know, say that they're not notable, but I do think when you compare these to previous periods, it slightly got a little bit better, you know, things were not too scary. And I'd like to say that as Saturn goes into Aries, May 24th, 2025 until 2028, that we won't have anything bad either. But I do think that we start to look at the, you know, the things that I mentioned, especially something like the Israel versus Palestine war, genocide. So I do think that we're looking at very tense moments. I do still think it's going to be like a bit of a, I'm going to test you out, but I'm not actually going to do anything, and sort of like just freak you out, give you a threat, but not actually follow through. I think April 2026 is when you probably see this follow through, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. So those are some historical accounts. Again, I'm not a historian, so I do apologise if I've got any of that wrong. But hopefully that you understand the theme, and my message is what I'm saying is that Saturn in Aries can bring quite dramatic conflict. Okay, so I'm now going to go into the rising signs, but I do want to mention again, if you have a Saturn in Aries in your natal chart, you are having your Saturn return. And if you are a cardinal sign, especially your sun, moon or rising, then this is really going to hit you a little bit more. But don't panic too much, because I know a lot of people comment and say, well, I'm a cardinal sign. You told me that when Pluto went out of Capricorn, we'd get a break, and we haven't. Jupiter goes into Cancer in June. So that's going to just basically level everything out. It's there for a whole year. It's going to bring better luck for cardinal signs. So it's almost like, yeah, you don't have a pro or a con. You're kind of just on the level playing field here. But if you do have a cardinal sign, so an Aries, Cancer, Capricorn or Libra, then you are going to be a little bit more you know, hit by this kind of energy as well. If you are in Aries rising, then this is in your first house of self, so this is going to be very notable for you. I have said in my 2025 horoscopes and continue to say Aries is the most transformative sign of all of them, of all the zodiac signs this year, because you're going through so many kind of like deeply transformative moments in your life, you know. Also Pisces as well, because there's a lot of transits going into these signs. But Saturn Aries in your first house of self is going to bring a lot of constriction to your identity and your goals. But it's really going to give you the lessons that you need to become the person that you need to be. This is kind of like the cherry on top of the I'm becoming who I'm meant to be kind of cycle this year for you, Aries. And I don't think this is going to be necessarily bad. I think this is going to get you to tap into your innate leadership skills, get you to be independent, get you to be the creator of your own reality. And I think that can actually be a really good thing. At the same time, I also think that you are going to be getting a boost in your sense of confidence and your self-esteem. In the negative, because again, there's always pros and cons to these transits. In the negative, you may suffer a little bit with your self-esteem. You don't really know what you're doing. You feel a little bit out of sorts. You're like, what am I meant to be doing in life? My purpose is really screwed right now. Neptune Aries is also kind of adding that energy as well, where you're really having an existential crisis of sorts about what you want to do with your life. You are going to be giving lessons, a sense of maturity, but overall the growth of you is going to be amazing. People are not going to recognize you by 2028. They're going to be like, who's that? For the better. So this is going to be very transformative for you, Aries. If you are a Taurus rising, this is in your 12th house, and this is a difficult place for Saturn and Aries to be, because again, Saturn does not like to be in Aries, and in the 12th house of mental health and the hidden, and house of karma. Okay, you know, I think you're definitely going to be experiencing some very unique relationships in your life, but you're also going to be discovering your self-esteem, your self-confidence, what you really want from your life. You're really going to be going through a kind of spiritual growth period here, especially when it comes to manifestation. You might also become disillusioned with your current lifestyle. You may feel that there is more to life. You might also feel that there are boundaries put upon you, and it makes you feel so mentally trapped that you may go through a very, you know, dark period where you think, how can I be free? How can I find the things that make me happy? This is good. Again, sounds like I'm being really like nasty saying this, but I'm not. This is okay. I've got a 12th house stellium. Let me tell you about that. So I know I'm with you, you're not alone, but there is a feeling that you go through this very intense, I want to say it's a dark night of the soul, and then you come out in for the better. You are just learning about what really affects you and what doesn't, your triggers, and also you are really stepping up for yourself. And when I say that, I mean you're not accepting scraps. You are like, hey, I am not the only girl, but I'm that girl, that boy, that ethereal being, right? So you are stepping into your power. If you are a Gemini rising, this is in your 11th house of friendships and social networking and wishes. You may experience some very profound changes with your friendships. You might meet important people, especially at work, that help you to understand more about who you are. You may also experience some issues with friends where you may be not able to see them for a long period because maybe one of your close friends moves away, for example. Or you might also start to go into yourself a little bit more and think about, what actually do I want from my life? Maybe I should pick people that really add to my life. And again, I think it's all about genuine value for you, and say, okay, well, this person is fun to be around, but they're very superficial. So do I really want them in my life? Maybe I have friends that are categorized as superficial friends and friends that are just, you know, really deep, and I can trust them with my innermost thoughts, and going through that kind of period. You might also find that you go through a period of trying to work on your career and yourself, so friendships don't become the priority, or even in the reverse, you become even more kind of focused on friendships because you realize that spending time alone is not for you. Depends what kind of person you are. This is going to float either side of the coin depending on who you are. If you are a Cancer, then this is in your 10th house of career. This is already going to affect you as a cardinal sign, but again, don't worry too much because Jupiter will be in your sign June onwards, so it's not going to be too bad. Although you will probably find some kind of, big transformation with your career. You might get a new job, you might move to a completely different field of your career. You may also experience some challenges at work that help you to become a better leader. For example, you may have to do more presentations, step up to be a line manager, or maybe even in the reverse, you don't get a lot of challenges and that pushes you to think, I'm not being respected for what I do here, so I need to push myself a little bit more. You're generally getting a lot of maturity with this 10th house as well, because 10th house is also career, but it's also basically maturity and really stepping up for a very large responsible role. Aries is itself a responsible instigator of the zodiac, and Cancer is, to me, the mother of the zodiac. So when these two are together, it's like you're stepping up. You could also be becoming a parent during this time, or find that you have to be stepping up and helping your parents if they're elderly, and you for some reason have to take on a responsibility role there as well. Generally, you are becoming a lot more responsible than other zodiac signs during this time, but it's actually for the better. And it also gives you a sense of really strong independence and self-confidence, because you're like, hey, I can handle anything right now. If you are a Leo, this is in your 9th house. I find this quite fascinating because the 9th house is Sagittarius. It's philosophical, it's about traveling, it's about freedom and developing knowledge. So you may embark on a study program that helps you to get a better job. You might also take some time to travel and find yourself. I always say it's hard to say you find yourself, because wherever you go, there you are. You know, I just went to Miami and I was like, yeah, still me. Great, can't escape myself. So maybe traveling might be something that helps you to become more mature. You might want to go traveling before you become a parent, or do something a little bit more, adulterous, shall we say, like buying a house, something where you're like, I want to just be a bit free for now, and that's what I want to do. Saturn and Aries may give you some lessons here where you're not able to do that, and so then it makes you realize, okay, I need to try to find a balance here in my life. But in this house of philosophy and spirituality, I think it's going to be a real transformation for you about what's holding you back. You may become very disillusioned with the kind of 9-to-5 industrial capitalist cycle that we're in, and you may find that sipping a pina colada on the beach is more for you. If it depends who you are, you might also find that's not really me, I want the balance. So Saturn's going to give you those kind of lessons and those boundaries where you can decide what is best for you. If you are a Virgo, this is in your 8th house. I would say this is quite important for you if you are a Virgo rising, because this is the 8th house of transformation, and Saturn in Aries is going to give you the lesson and the transformation. So I think this is quite poignant. You're definitely going to be going through some boundaries and constrictions, maybe with savings and investments. You might get some lessons about money. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but you might learn, maybe I've been spending too much. You might get yourself into debt and then find you have to try and get out of it. Depending on who you are, you might find that you have a surplus of money, and then you have to figure out what to do with that. There could be some energy with relationships here as well, especially because Aries rules the sex drive, and 8th house is intimacy, physical and sex. So you could find that you go through a period of trying to understand what you want from your physical intimacy and your sex life, but also your relationships. So it could be like, look, this is a great relationship in the bedroom, but I'm not getting the commitment that I want, that Saturn want to give me. So what do I do now? Or reverse, you might find I don't want the constriction of commitment, I want to be free. Again, all of these depends on who you are and the rest of the things that are in your chart. Generally, this is going to be quite transformative for you if you are a Virgo rising. If you are a Libra rising, this is in your 7th house of committed relationships. Aries is your sister sign, so you are naturally always going to be sharing the kind of load here. So this is quite significant because the 7th house is about commitment, and it is about locking things down, like contracts. It doesn't have to be love, by the way, if you're not interested in that. It can also be a contract with work, a landlord, anything where you have a commitment. But really, this is going to be a very extreme lesson about what you want from commitment. I see this less as being like, a floaty and free and being a paper bag in the wind kind of energy, although it can be depending on who you are, but more about what do I want from my love life, my commitments. You could get married during this time. You could be seeking a partner in a very serious fashion. You could be saying, look, I've done a couple of dates and going to a coffee shop. I don't want that anymore. I need this commitment. I need to be shown that I have some stability here. You could also, depending again on who you are, go through a breakup instead. It's always conditional on the kind of person you are and what is in your chart. I don't want to be negative, but Saturn can bring the boundaries, constrictions, so you may go through those issues, but it will make you understand what you actually want from your love life and also your commitments as well. You might find that being free, being a little bit like, untethered is your kind of thing. If you're a Scorpio rising, this is in your 6th house. So you will most likely get some kind of constriction when it comes to physical health. I'm not saying it's an injury, but you might find that there is some kind of, boundary that you have to set around your physical health. I mean, if you have chronic illness, because Scorpio is really dealing with chronic illness and inflammation and issues with physical health this year. If you have anything like that, or you have very high cortisol levels, you get stressed easily, you might have to set the boundaries around people using you or you having to do too much. You might want to say to people, look, you're using me like a brothel. I don't want to be here, there, and everywhere. It's taking a toll on my mental health. It's taking a toll on my physical health. And you have to set the boundaries there, because if you don't, Saturn's going to do it for you. So you have to be a little bit more sort of like in your intuitive energy of like, look, I don't want to be a bitch, but you need to leave now because it's 9 o'clock and I need to go to bed. And I don't want to be doing this anymore. Just setting your boundaries there. But also be setting boundaries around your productivity routine and saying, look, I have to get at 4:55 a.m. because that's my thing, and I have to go to the gym, and I'm sorry that I have to be like this, but I have to go because it's for my mental health and my physical health, and I have to do it, right? So you're really putting the boundaries in place. You probably also get some kind of maybe tension around co-workers and colleagues, and you have to set boundaries in place there where you're like, okay, I'm the one talking, I'm the one in charge, do not walk all over me. So I think, Scorpio, you're really stepping into your power and actually, setting the boundaries that I think it's normal for you to set, but it might be hard for you to do it, especially because Scorpios don't open up very much and they don't really like to share too much about themselves, and they don't necessarily sometimes like to be the one doing it. But you have to remember that Scorpio is ruled by Mars, Pluto and Mars, but Mars, and so is Aries. So it's kind of like you're going to be the one out of all of the zodiac signs apart from Aries, stepping into that leadership element that Saturn will bring and really saying, I've got to do this for myself. If you're a Sagittarius rising, this is in your 5th house of dating, creativity, and children. So you might go through some periods of dating here, but you actually meet somebody that is very important to your life and you want it to be a commitment. I see this less as you like going through lots of needless dating and actually finding somebody that you want. You may be like, look, I'm fed up of these dating apps. I'm fed up of going on a couple of coffee dates and that's where it ends. I need to have something in my life. I'm a Sagittarius, right? And I know people go, oh, Sagittarius don't like to commit. We don't, but we do at the same time. We're just avoidance. That's it. We want love. We crave it. Actually, we really crave the affection. It's just when we get it, that's when it scares us. So it's always about the commitment here. So it's about getting the ring and being like, okay, maybe that's what I want. Creativity is going to be very interesting here. You might find that you have to put some boundaries in place with work where you're not having enough fun, you're not traveling, you're not being free, you're not being expressive enough because work is taking over your life, and you have to put these boundaries in place and say, no, I want to be fun and I want to be exciting, like Aries, a fellow fire sign, and you have to put that in place. You may also have children during this time, this 5th house. You may decide to build a family. It may happen out the blue for you, especially in that 5th house. It's very risky kind of energy, but you're not really listening to society's pressure here. You're doing it because you want to do it, because you want to kind of, I don't want to say experiment, because I'm like, children are a big thing, but maybe you might be a person that never really liked having children. Now you're like, okay, maybe I'm going to try that. If you're a Capricorn rising like myself, this is in the 4th house of home and family. So definitely could be doing something very important and mature, like buying a house. I personally am planning to buy a house next year. And that's a really big, mature kind of thing. Can even buy an apartment or rent an apartment, whatever is like for you. Everyone's on a different timeline. So whatever it feels like really mature and really fixed for you, that's going to be for you. Could be building a family through children or having to look after parents. You could also be deciding to spend more time at home with your family and maybe prioritizing, people around you. Again, another thing I want to start doing as well. You could also get some boundaries and lessons around that. So you may get some restrictions where you find it difficult to purchase property, or you might find it difficult to really extend and build a family. But in your mind, those are things that you want to do. So you're going to be fast forward and moving with it, but you just have to be consistent throughout the challenges. If you are an Aquarius rising, this is in your 3rd house of communication, productivity, writing. And what I like about this is that this is going to give you some real confidence when it comes to your self-expression and what you say to people. You are no longer going to be keeping your mouth shut and letting people walk all over you. And Aquariuses can be quite reserved. All right, some of them aren't, but most Aquariuses that especially I know can be quite reserved. They don't really like people, they're a bit robotic. They like to be away from people. And sometimes they can't ever express what's really on their mind because they're a bit, the fear of judgment. So this is like, okay, Aries is going to push you to be like, I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Will that bring some kind of challenges and lessons to you? Yes. Who gives a shit? Open up the throat chakra. Do it, right? Your productivity routine might be changed because of something quite significant happening in your life. Again, this could be growing a family, a new job where, suddenly your routine is changed. These are all things that are going to help you understand what you want from life. So again, it's never a bad thing. It's just like, okay, this is what I need to work towards. So you may also begin to start journaling or, using a diary more. And some of you could also, if you're, a writer or you're more creative, write a book or something, or maybe even start writing poetry and finding a nice creative outlet. And finally, if you're a Pisces rising, this is in your second house of finance and income. So I think this is quite important. And this is really going to give you a lot of lessons about your finances. This does not necessarily mean that you're going through debt or you're going to be homeless or you're going to be having a financial windfall. It doesn't necessarily mean any of that. It just means that you're going to be understanding more about your finances. A bit like Virgo in the 8th house, you're having a transformation with your income. You could be getting more income through a job. Again, this is about Saturn in Aries giving you that leadership energy. So asking for a raise, going for opportunities that give you more money, being a bit more, mature with your finances. So saying, actually, maybe I should save money and stop being so, here, there, and everywhere, and, booking a flight to freaking Hawaii and then say, oh, that's a bit expensive. You're being a little bit more mature with your finances. You might also find that you become more committed to food and diet because maybe there's a restriction on your diet, so you could have some gut issues, for example, or you might find that I need to lose some weight, or for some of you, again, some of you may have hormonal issues like polycystic ovaries, where certain things in your diet may help you with inflammation and hormonal regulation, and that's going to be a lesson that you have to learn. So of course, it's not exhaustive of what will happen to the rising signs. It's just my interpretation. I could sit for hours talking about this, but I don't want to because the video is almost nearly an hour anyway. And I don't really film a lot of long videos, but I'm like really excited and interested about this transit. So I wanted to talk about everything. But please do let me know in the comments, what you think is going to come for your rising sign and the rest of your placements. Do you have a Saturn in Aries? Are you having your Saturn return? Are you a Saturn in Pisces kid like me? Are you excited to be out of the Saturn return? Let me know what you think about, global and political events too. But generally, Saturn in Aries, like I said, it's not the best place for it to be, but I think it's going to give us some really interesting lessons. I'm personally very excited and interested about it. When it comes and meets Neptune in Aries, it's going to be so fascinating. And in 2026, when we have a 0-degree conjunction between Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries, fascinating indeed. So yeah, I think this is a very exciting year. So much going on, so many things that are happening in the world, and some of them for good, some of them definitely for bad. But astrology is all about looking at the data and patterns of the world and seeing what will happen next. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you for my next one, which will be about the lovely new moon in Gemini. So bye.